Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today it is Poetry Thursday, and today I wanted to talk about another LGBTQA poem, since we are in this period of Pride. And today's poem is all about the anger you feel about oppression and gentrification. I am referring to Sidewalk Rage by Pamela Sneed. For those who don't know, Pamela Sneed is a Black American writer. She has been writing for the past 20 or so years, but has been involved in poetry for maybe even longer than that. She is a lesbian, which is part of the reason I am cataloging her writing here today. She's written a number of books of poetry. She's also written a memoir, which is where this poem comes from. It's called Funeral Diva, which is about her experience with the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. Pretty interesting title, Funeral Diva, suggesting that maybe as a LGBT person, she's probably had to go to a number of funerals and has had to dress up for them. Maybe some dark humor there, which is, sad, but also interesting in a number of ways. So some very, very interesting work that she's been doing. She's also hosted a TV show on public access in New York City called Dyke TV. I've never heard of it, but it sounds like it was pretty transformative for LGBT affairs in the 90s, particularly for lesbians. And I think it's another example of how something that seems innocuous at the time probably becomes more radical as time goes on, as that might have been seemed pretty normal. Getting a LGBT show on public access in the 90s at the time, but now it probably seems a little bit radical, and there'd be a lot of pushback on it because there'd probably be a lot of parents saying, "Oh, I don't want my children knowing about the LGBT community," and they doing some pushback, maybe even threats to those kinds of people. Those parents not really realizing that in order to prevent your children from finding it, you should probably have conversations about it, about what they can and can't experience until they're certain ages. That's what my parents did, but they probably did that more about like South Park and related TV shows. But still, having conversations with your children about media is the first step to, being able to control what they can and can't watch or read. So if you don't want your children experiencing sexual things, and I would argue that LGBT was more gender identity than anything else, or like Dyke TV about that. But the parents didn't really see it that way, and they don't see it now, so they're behaving like reactionary conservatives, and it's unfortunate. But Dyke TV seemed to be a really big thing, and really transformative, and allowed people to tell certain kind of stories and do certain kind of art, which is cool. So very fascinating writer and performer that I'm talking about here today. And without further ado, let's talk about Sidewalk Rage. I will read it, do a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. Sidewalk Rage. I'm not sure why, but it's taken forever for me to write this poem. I hope to remember all the pieces, but I've developed a new condition. One that's come from age. I can no longer take the shit I once did. And there's a part of my condition that comes from gentrification and cell phone use, living amidst tech zombies and their general fear and hatred of people of color. My condition is called sidewalk rage, kind of like road rage, but comes when walking down the street and there's some millennial who's just moved into the neighborhood who thinks it's theirs. A little grown-ass white girl who in broad daylight feels a dark presence walking behind her. It's me minding my own business, and she gets so panicked and paralyzed, she stops walking and holds her purse. With my new condition, I yell, "If you don't want to live around black people, get the fuck out of the neighborhood." She is shocked. Or in yet another scenario, you see random white women on their cell phones, standing in a doorway completely blocking it. Because you know only they exist, and you're like, hello, hello. Yes, all these years I thought I was still a small town girl, and then suddenly with my sidewalk rage, I'm a bona fide New Yorker. like the ones you've seen on bicycles banging on the hood of a taxi cab that tries to cut them off. My person with sidewalk rage is a character of their own, where once I was silent. Recently, I confronted a man who was blocking my path crossing the street. He had his head down and almost rammed into me. I sucked my teeth loud and shouted, "Hello, hello." He was so angry I confronted him, he yelled, "Suck my dick." I started to yell something profane, but I stopped myself. And then I was in the subway, going downstairs, and a white man rammed into me on the phone. My sidewalk rage kicked in and thought for a second to sneak behind him and kick him down the stairs. That's my sidewalk rage. I stopped myself. I don't know who this person is, and me, who would never speak up for herself, was always soft and vulnerable, who's been at various times pickpocketed, blasphemed, body-shamed, ransacked, ridiculed, who now has a voice, who now lets rage show, who couldn't express herself, has now become all angles and sharp edges. So that was Sidewalk Rage. In terms of analysis, there's a fair bit to talk about with this poem. In terms of narrative, I think it's easy to see what Sneed is getting at, noting that in the past they've been calm, quiet, haven't really stood up for themselves. But recently, they've come to notice oppressive things in their neighborhood, just people sort of blocking their path or just pushing them to the side, being very rude, as you might see with gentrification, because people don't look out for people of color in the neighborhood. And also highlighting some racism in the first case, where there's a woman who senses Pamela, or the narrator, behind her, and she grabs at her purse. Very obviously racist gesture, as they believe this black person is there to mug them. And they develop this sidewalk rage where they stand up for themselves, they push people away, they think about kicking people down the stairs, and they yell and stand up for themselves. They particularly say, like, if you don't want to live around black people, get the fuck out of the neighborhood. There's a use of a lot of profanity in this poem to highlight the feeling of rage. If she simply said "get out of the neighborhood," I don't feel it would have as big of an impact. But if you're saying get the fuck out of the neighborhood, it highlights the indignity of being persecuted based on your race in the place where you live, where years previously, people of color could live without having to worry about being targeted for racism in their community. But now, with this gentrification, even in your own home, you're targeted. It's not just in other areas of the world. People have moved in and they're trying to push you out, make you feel less than, and it's certainly not a good feeling. Another interesting aspect of this poem is the use of repetition. You see it when she's calling out to people. She's like, "Hello, hello," in all capital letters, getting at the sense of pay attention to me, I'm talking to you, sort of thing. But also maybe noting how you often have to shout, you often have to repeat yourself to be heard as a person of color, especially a black woman, like a black woman, and especially as a lesbian black woman. It might be so easy to be overlooked in those cases. There's a good sense of repetition in this poem, and you also see it near the end, where the narrator says, "Who's been various times pickpocketed, who now has a voice, who now lets rage show." So just saying, this is the emphasis on who I am now, trying to get that out there. I'll also say the end of the poem is particularly notable because the narrator says, "Who couldn't express herself has now become all angles and sharp edges." So you see throughout the poem that they're standing up for themselves. But in that last line, it kind of twists the poem a little bit in noting how the character is unhappy that they have to do that they have to become hard and jagged and push away people because the world is gentrifying them, showing how racism often, extreme hate directed to you, often makes you hard and no longer as soft as maybe you want to be. So it's sort of a lament of how the world has made her this way. and how she'd probably like that not to happen. But that requires gentrification and the racism that might exist in these neighborhoods to go away, which, once it's got its hooks in, isn't always easy. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Sidewalk Rage, a pretty quality poem and a great addition to this period of pride that we have going on. I'll put a link to it in the description. Go ahead and read it and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about Pamela or this poem if they don't know already, or even her memoir, Funeral Diva, which sounds pretty interesting. I might want to check it out. Also join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about poetry, books, movies, TV, and various stuff like that. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and rage-filled travels. Farewell.